Okay. I believe Akiva is sponsoring the broadcast in honor of his son Yehuda's bar mitzvah and the Nishmas Mendel Arnov, who was nifter this week. It's also sponsored today. Is still sponsored by Philip Davidovich in memory of his father, Shmuel David Reb Moshe, whose yahrzeit was Beis Tammuz, which was last Shabbos. We also want to say Mazel Tov to Shmuel on the beautiful, beautiful simcha and engagement of his daughter Esti. Okay. Yesterday we learned something very interesting. I mentioned in passing that one of the reasons why it's called Ish Iti is because it means a person whose time has come. Since the person who took the seer to the Lazazel ended up dying that year, they always made sure to pick somebody who they knew anyway was destined to die. So if the Lazazel commission called you, it wasn't a good news. It wasn't a good news story. So how do you know this? Where does this come from? So the Cheskuni on the actual Pasha in Kodesh Kedolos, in Pasha Achinois, says that Ish Ishti means someone who's going to be dying that year anyway. And how do they know? He says something with Mazaloi, so you call him Beino. So it almost sounds, that's what he says. They looked into the Mazalos. They used the zodiac. They used astrology to figure out Klal Yisrael is above Mazalos, we're Lamaila and Mazalos, but they used the zodiac to determine who would die that year. And then they would say, hey, you're dying anyway, maybe you want to do this for us. Which is an interesting twist. That was the only thing that I was able to, I wouldn't know where to look. I listened to different shiurim. The only thing that someone mentioned, where Rav spoke out from the Cheskuni, that through Mazal, he says, something Chachmas HaMazal, so you call it Beino. And they using Chachmas HaMazal, they found that someone who was going to die anyway. They had to find somebody who was going to die who was in good shape because he had to schlep it out to the midbar. And that's who they picked. So that's one selection committee you didn't want to hear from.
Well, maybe it was, those people, the door of the midbar who died on their 60th birthday.
So that worked really well if you were in the midbar. But what if you were in Yerushalayim years later?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't like that pshat. It doesn't resonate with me. So what do you mean? They went to pick. How do you go? They checked out like a few dozen people who were in the parsha, who were old, or who were. I mean, how do they start looking?
It had to be somebody who would be able to walk 12 mil.
Right.
There's a lot. So I'm not sure how the selection committee worked.
Maybe. He was chayv misa. He was over some deraisa that you're chayv misa.
But then they would have to do it right away. Normally, we learn to do it that day. They got to take them straight from the mishpat. There's no appeal process. No appeals process.
Right.
So, it's a chashuv. If anybody has more information on this, it will be interesting to understand how they pinpointed. And you're asking me, okay, if they analyze a specific guy, they might deem as mazel. But how do they know who's mazel to look into?
That's right.
I don't know. It's a good question. Okay, so let's see the Mishnah. Miyakira Yerushalayim, and Rashi teaches Yakiri as Mechashuba Yerushalayim. And the Chazal people of Yerushalayim, who Yimalava Noisai at Sukkah Harishayim. So we're going to soon learn that Eser Sukkah is from Yerushalayim Vatzaik. They set up little pit stops, little shelters with food and drink. We'll see soon. And not everybody walked in from Yerushalayim all the way to the Tzok, but in each pit stop there were people that helped walk him to the next destination, so he shouldn't have to be alone.
This is the first before the ramp, I guess.
No, after the ramp. The ramp is taking him out of the Beis Hamikdash, out of the Azara. Then he got into the outskirts of the city, and he's walking by himself for 12 mil.
Oh, I thought that ramp went all the way to Har HaZeisim. I guess not. No,
Where
I could be.
Is the Tzuk on Har HaZeisim? By the Paraduma, I think it went all the way to Har HaZeisim. And that's because we wanted to give Torah. With a double, we looked at a double bridge.
Right. Okay, I'm confusing the two.
I think this just got him out of the crowd.
Right. So where's the location?
Back entrance to the studio.
Right. So where's the location of this? Where you throw the Lazazel off the cliff?
I'm not sure, but I know that when you take tours of Eretz Yisrael, they tell you this was it and how you're going to prove them wrong. I don't even know if all the tour guides have the same one that they point to, but I think they do know where it was, or roughly where it was.
Yeah, I had a tour guide years ago that pointed. We were in the Jordan Valley, and he pointed east, and he said, pointed to a mountain. He said, "That's Har Nevo, where Moshe Rabbeinu is buried."
So nobody knows except for him.
That's right.
The Shmuel Aleph and the Shmuel Beis tour guide, Okay, so let's see what we have over here. So they're called Yakira Yerushalayim. Why were they called Yakira Yerushalayim, the Chosh of Yerushalayim? So Rabbi Elephant spoke out from somebody. He said, normally, where does all the Shine want to be? They want to be Oyvanu in front row center in the base of Mikdash. We're on Yom Kippur. It's the day of the year. That's where all the Chassidim want to be sitting near the Rebbe up front. It's a major day. And they volunteered to miss the entire action. And instead, they're going to take a walk in the midbar. Why? Because they want to be Malava. The person who's doing the Seir Lazazel, so it clearly shows that they're doing what they're doing with Shem Shemayim. They want to help in the Avodah. They're not interested in getting the front row seat. And they won't even be able to watch it on the video because it's Yom Kippur. So it says, Miyakir Yerushalayim, V'yimalavonois Yatzukah Rishayna. And the Mishnah says, Eser Sukkos Mirushalayim V'yatzai. There was a total of 10 pit stops. And it also worked out to the distance. It also worked out to Tishim Reis. It was 90 Reis. So Reis is a measure of distance that there's some controversy about. That we'll see in Rashi. It's a long Rashi, but it's interesting. So Tishim Reis, which is Shiva Umechza L'chol Mil. So if we use our calculator, there's 7.5 Reis for a mil. A mil is 2,000 amos, we'll see. So if 90 Reis, 7.5 per mil would mean 90 divided by 7.5. Let's figure that out. 90 divided by 7.5 is 12, right? So that's why it was 12 mil. I'll call sukkah v'sukkah. At each pit stop, oimrim loy, they would tell him, harei mazoin, harei mayim. They prepared food and drink for him, which is a shaila into itself. You're mute.
On Yom Kippur?
On Yom Kippur, which is a shaila into itself. How could he just eat? So there's actually a machlokes Rishonim about this. Most of the Rishonim hold that he was only allowed to eat if it was pikuch nefesh. And the main purpose of the food was it should be pas pasalad. If a person is not worried that he's going to die, he knows worst case scenario, he has access to food, that in and of itself would help him. The Gemara mentions that later. The Rambam is the only Rishon who holds that you're allowed to eat, no problem. Even if he's somewhat uncomfortable, he's allowed to eat. So the briskers say a whole lot of Torah on this, is that it has a din of avodah. It has a din of avodah. And just like shechita is not allowed to be done on Yom Kippur, but as part of an avodah, it's allowed to be done. So too, all of the requirements of the Seir Lazazel are also allowed to be done. It doesn't say anything about eating and drinking. So it's interesting to note that by the Seir Lazazel, all it says is Vasir Asher Allah Lagor Yom Chai Vashalach Oisei Lazazel Hamidvara. That's all it says. It doesn't say anything about it pushing him off a mountain. It doesn't say any of this stuff. So most of the activity, most of the process of the Sir Lazazel is not mentioned specifically in the Torah. All of this Chazal teach us. But and there's a shaila why it's not mentioned. And one of the Sevaris that I brought down is it was B'derech Nes. Normally, a sheep should be able to maintain its footing even on mountains. You see these mountain goats can do that. So the whole thing was a little bit B'derech Nes. And that's where they learned that Torah doesn't like to explicitly state things that you're doing involved in Ma'aseh Nisim. So the Torah keeps it a little bit cloaked. But a lot of the mandatory parts of the Avodah aren't mentioned specifically in the Torah, but the Rambam learns that since it's part of the Avodah, it's going to be Doich Kippur. They walk him from sukkah to sukkah, which means the people from Yerushalayim would walk him to the first sukkah. And the concern here is tchum. You're not allowed to walk out of your tchum. So if you're in Yerushalayim, you're not allowed to walk more than the 2,000 amos, than the mill where the first sukkah was. Therefore, the people from Yerushalayim were only able to walk him to the first sukkah. From the first sukkah to the second sukkah, the people who were in this first sukkah were able to walk another 2,000 amos. Although he himself was able to walk past the tchum, because that was part of the avodah, those who accompanied him didn't want to walk past the tchum. Chutz me'acharon shobehen, except for the people who accommodated him from the last one. Because if you think about it, if it's a total of 12 mil and he has 10 sukkahs, so it means the first sukkah is 1 mil away from Yerushalayim, which would mean that the 10th sukkah would be the 10th mil away from Yerushalayim. Now there's 2 more mil to go. But the people in the 10th sukkah can only travel 1 mil. So therefore, they traveled 1 mil, and the last mil to get up to the top of the peak of the mountain, he had to walk by himself. Those people stopped after 1 mil, which was their tchum limitation, and they would and they'd watch what he was doing. And this is like the Maimodos, where you always need, like a Yisrael, you need someone watching and make sure every part of the avodah will be done properly. As an aside, there's a machlokes here in Rashi how big a ris is. So Rashi has an interesting cheshbon. It's a complete aside. You know what? Maybe we'll leave it because it's 6:18. I don't know if we'll finish. But Rashi makes a cheshbon of how much a ris is, and it works out that a ris has in it about 180 amas, according to our cheshbon over here. However, Rashi brought down from a Lazazel Kalir and from other places that seem to indicate that a ris was less than 180 amas. So just a discrepancy in the distance of what a ris is. The Arnov clearly says that 90 ris is 12 mil. If you wanted to do the conversion between a ris and an amma, we know a mil is 2,000 amas. So if you do 2,000 divided by 7.5, I believe you get 180. 2,000 divided by 7.5, no, you get 266. So I'm not doing this right. Tishim ris shiva mechsel l'chol mil. There's 7.5 ris for a mil. So let's think. So I mean 7.5. 7.5 is 2,000. So it's 2,000 divided by 7.5. 2,000 divided by 7.5 is still 266. So I don't have my cheshbon right. Okay, so let's see the Gemara Baita. What exactly would the person who was processing the Sir Lazazel, what would he do? So the first thing he would do is Chaylik Loshen Shal Zahuris. He would take a bunch of red thread and he would tear it in half. So once again there's a shaila. How could he do that? So there's a lot of raid. How he's able to cut it, if he doesn't, maybe he didn't measure exactly. If he can measure it, the shaila choita. Chetze kasher b'sela. Half of it he tied on the mountain peak. How could you tie? So the whole shaila is that called the kesher shoklayama. Maybe he didn't do a kesher shoklayama, or maybe since since his intention is not that it should last forever, it only has to last for a few minutes. So it's not called the kesher shekoyama, but there's a lot of rate on how this was done without violating any yisurim. The chetzei kosher ben shnei karna, and the other half of the lashon zoros with the red thread he tied around the horns of this animal that he was going to push down. The dach v'lachoyer, he would push the animal backwards, and it would roll down the mountain. By the time it was even halfway down the mountain, it would have been completely broken up into its ivarim. Then nobody wants to wait on a mountaintop until it becomes pitch black and then make his way home off a scary mountaintop all the way back to Yerushalayim. So because of that, on Yom Kippur itself, they let him trek back to the last pit stop where he could be with other people. The pasuk tells us that the person who takes the shiur Lazazel, he's tamei and his begadim are tamei. At what point is this tamei triggered? As soon as he left the walls of Yerushalayim and he's headed on his way, at that point he's going to become tamei. No, he doesn't become tamei until he pushes the animal off the mountaintop. What
kind of tamei are we talking about?
Well, if he's metame begadim, so he must be at least a avatuma, because the least tamei that kalim that begadim could be is a rishon. So he becomes an avatuma.
Is this a deraisa tamei or a derabanan tamei?
No, it's deraisa. The Torah says specifically that he's tamei. The pasuk actually says that the person who does that is tamei. Just like the person who's taking the meat from the fire to burn.
Uh-huh.
You want to know what causes this tumah? He wasn't exposed.
Yeah,
to
what triggers the tumah?
So there's I think there's a brisker Rav on this. Someone spoke up from I think it's from the brisker Rav. That any time, or it might be from the Beis Halevi, that no, I'm sorry, it's the Meshech Chochma. The Meshech Chochma speaks out that any time someone is mafred himself from kedusha, that automatically creates tumah. So if someone is, for instance, you have an animal that's in the Beis Hamikdash, and you're taking it away to burn it mechutz l'machane, that departure from the Makam Kadosh would lead to a tumah. Which according to that svara, it would make sense that he should get a tumah as soon as he leaves Yerushalayim, not when he pushes it down the mountain. But the Meshech Chochma says there's a tumah that's triggered from leaving kedusha. He even asks, by the Parah Aduma, he also becomes tamei, and there he's not leaving kedusha because the shechita itself was by harazaisim. And that he says, but since you were shechting it and you were spritzing down towards the heichal, that's called a connection, and once you disengage from it, it leads to a tumah. Let's see what it says over here. It says Mishalech pasuk chavav nachinois Mishalech es hasoyer Lazazel yichabes begodov v'rochat es pesoyer b'mayim v'yacha yav yalamachana. So it says that he's tamei. That's an interesting point. Normally, tumah comes from being exposed to something that has tumah. Here, the tumah is a new type of tumah. It comes from leaving the makam kedusha. Tana Rabban, Eser Sukkos, there were 10 pit stops made, Ushneim Aser Milhay, and there was 12 mil, the Vermeer. And that's how we explained in the Mishnah that he was accompanied until 1 mil past the 10th sukkah, and that last 1 mil, he had to go on his own because the people who were stationed in the 10th sukkah were limited by the tchum, so they could only walk 1 mil past it. And 1 mil is 2,000 amas, and we know the tchum is 2,000 amas. Divrei Meir. And Yehuda Omer, Teisha sukkos, there were only 9 sukkos, but it was a Asara mil. So therefore, the 9th sukkah got you to the 9th mil, and then the last mil was the mil between the last sukkah and the tzoik, which means they would have been able to accompany him all the way because they are allowed to walk a mil past the last sukkah. The Yosy Eimer, Chamesh sukkos, there were only 5 sukkos, Vasar Milin, and there was still 10 mil. Vasar Milin, but it's not a problem. If I'm stationed in the first sukkah, I can only go 2,000 amas. But what if I'm stationed in the first sukkah, but I make an Erev Tchumen, 2,000 amas away from me? Now I actually can go 4,000 amas from my sukkah. So therefore, even though they were further apart, but we're giving each person 4,000 amas from the sukkah in order to be able to go 2,000 radius from the Erev in the middle, which is interesting to note, because how do you make an Erev Tchumen? You place a meal where you're planning to go, and that stations you. On Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to eat, yet you're still able to make an Erev Tchumen with a meal, because I guess a person's thoughts are with his food, whether he can eat it or not. Okay, Zok the Gemara weiter. Oh my Yosy, Sachli Elazar B'ni, my son Elazar told me a little bit of a secret. If you're letting me use Erev Tchumen on Yom Kippur, then you chalanu lasais afidu shtei sukkos vasar milan. I could arrange travel of 10 million with only 2 sukkahs. And the way it would be done is very, very simple. From Yerushalayim to the first sukkah could be 4 mil. I'm sorry, could be 2 mil. Why could there be 2 mil? I'm sorry, it could be 4 mil. Because we're each allowed. Yeah, it could, 1 second. From Yerushalayim till the first sukkah could be 4 mil. Why? Because you can have the people of Yerushalayim make their Erev 1 mil out, which will allow the people from Yerushalayim to walk the 2 mil, and then you can have the people who are staying in the first sukkah also to make an Erev that are 2 mil out. So they could meet in the middle, and that would allow them to be 4 mil apart. And then so that means you could have 4 mil to the first sukkah and 4 mil to the second sukkah, and then you're perfectly fine getting to your destination. Zoktamar, Kaman Azla, Hodetanya, who would be the Tana of the following verse? Chutz me'achron shebehen shelo yagi imay letzuk, which is what our Tana says. The last group staying in the last sukkah was not able to make it all the way up to the tzuk because the tchum limited them. Come on, Kreb Meir, which Meir was the one who said it was 12 mil and only 10 sukkahs, which means that there would be 2 mil from the last sukkah until the tzuk, and therefore the people of the last sukkah couldn't come along. Okay, so the Gemara about it. I'll call sukkah v'sukkah. The Mishnah says that at every pit stop, they said, help yourself, you're allowed to eat, you're allowed to drink. Tana, we learned a brayso. No one ever needed to actually take advantage of the refreshments to eat and drink. But why do we offer it? If the person, the Ishiti, knows that he has food available if he needs it, that will calm him down, and he won't even need to dip into that. Why Bechlal does he put any of the red string on the horn? Who's going to see it there? Why don't you just put it all on the rock so that everybody sees it? Given the mitzvah b'seir, since there is a mitzvah for him to push the seir down the mountain, we're afraid dilma kademu malvin. What are we going to do if he puts the thread on the rock, and even before he pushes the goat down the mountain, the thread will go white? Maybe the Yidden will be zoicha to their kapara earlier, and he'll calm down and he won't even bother finishing the avodah. And the problem is that's one of the mitzvahs that has to be done. Mechila or no mechila, that's what has to be done. So therefore, what we make him do is after he hangs some of the thread on the mountaintop, he then has to go to the seir and put thread on the seir so that he'll be busy with the seir. If he'll be busy with the seir, he won't get distracted and he'll push it down. In fact, Gemara, if that's the point, so v'naktere kulei ben karno, why don't you put all of the thread on the horns, and then for sure he will remember to throw the animal down. Of course, Zimnin the Gomish Reshe, he's pushing it down backwards. Its head could twist over into a position where you won't be able to see the thread anymore. And we do want him to see the thread going right. They used to hang also, this is what we call closed circuit TV, a remote screen. Like nowadays when you go to a dinner, if you can't see the speaker, they have remote screens here and there so you can get live coverage. So this was the first incident of live coverage, because besides the people at the tzike who were able to see what was going on, they had a remote feed in the Heichel where they hung a red thread there as well, and everybody would see Hilbin. When everyone saw it became white, how you smechen? Everybody was happy. The problem is loy Hilbin. What if it didn't turn white? How you at saving? Then people were terribly upset that they didn't get their mechila umisbaishin, and they would be very humiliated that their tshuva wasn't accepted. So because of that, hiskinu sheyiyu koshrin al pesach ulam milifnim. They made a takana that people shouldn't see anymore what happens, and it'll be hidden inside the ulam where it would be out of the sight of everybody. So they still had a closed circuit TV hooked up, but no one was able to see it. That's a very good question. The other question is, so by hiding it from that's better? Let them know they have to be misamitz and tshuva. And the third question is that the Gemara tells us, the halacha tells us, Yom Kippur, the atzmoi shel yoim is mechaper, even without tshuva. So what's pshat? What are they supposed to do? So I want to get to that in a second. I just want to finish the thought of the Gemara. Even though it was inside the Heichel, they still managed to strain and find some way to get a glimpse of what was going on with the thread. And therefore, so from here you see that the original takana was they didn't even put it on the sheep. All of the wool remained in the Beis Hamikdash. After the people were seeing and it was causing trouble, they completely disconnected the remote feed, and they only had the Lashon Shel Zahuris. They only had the red wool over there. Originally, they never had it in public. They always had it inside. And as soon as the seir reached the midbar, even before they pushed it down, it turned white. And they knew that the mitzvah was done. Even if your chatayim are red, they'll become white. So this second shot is a little bit easier to understand, because it wasn't telling them whether or not there was a mechila. The mechila happens no matter what. The atzma shayim is mechaper, but they needed an indication that the avodah was done properly. That was the signal, but it wasn't about the mechila. But here it says it was about the mechila. So there's a lot of Torah on what this was about. Andera learned that it's not pshat that they didn't have mechila, but it means that their Rebbeinu Shalom wasn't completely happy with them. They weren't doing a full tshuva. They weren't completely rebranding themselves, making themselves into new people. Then that's why they were misbaishin. But there was a mechila, but the general concept is a little difficult. It's also difficult that if they aren't going to know, so how would they know to better themselves? If anything, you should show them, like Shmuel asked. On that, the answer is that we know we have to daven b'simcha. In order for our tefillos to be in skabel, in order to be able to daven properly, we have to be very hopeful. We have to be able to daven well. So therefore, they didn't show it to us. But after Yom Kippur, when the avodah was done, or after davening, then the Kohen Gadol did share with everybody the report to tell them that they have to improve. But during the tefillah, I guess they didn't want to share that because it would put a big downer on things and people wouldn't be able to daven properly. That was another one of the sources that I mentioned. But the concept is a little bit difficult to understand. So I want to share a story with you that Rabbi Loi once spoke out in the Shabbat Shuvah Drasha. The Panovich Sharov was once traveling, I believe it was somewhere in South America, and he was walking down the street and he saw posts on the telephone poles that were advertising an open public debate between an Orthodox rabbi and a Reform rabbi. So the Panovich Rav thought, this will be an interesting venue to visit. So he went there, and he was there. And of course, the emes always comes out. So the Orthodox rabbi is coming up with very strong tinus, and he has the Reformed rabbi on the ropes because the emes wins over. Until suddenly, the Reformed rabbi turns to the Orthodox rabbi and says, Rabbi so-and-so, wasn't that you I saw drive up to McDonald's last Shabbos and go in and order a burger? And the Orthodox rabbi turned red like a ketchup bottle. He goes nuts and he starts stammering. He was caught red-handed. So the Reform rabbi says, you see, you're a phony, you're a fake, you're a fraud. As a matter of fact, all of you Orthodox people are fakes, phonies, and frauds. This whole antiquated rule book is nonsense, and you know it's nonsense, and you're just sticking to it to make yourself feel better. But you guys are a bunch of fakers. And this was like a slam dunk knockout on orthodoxy. So the Hanim and the Panovich got up and says, would it be okay if I shared some thoughts? He said, sure, this is an open debate. Everyone's opinions are welcome. So he turns to the Reform rabbi and he asks him, tell me, Rabbi, do you eat kosher food? He said, of course not. I'm proud of it too. You think I'm going to subscribe to these crazy ancient laws that have no relevance to today's life, to today's world? So how about Shabbos? Do you keep Shabbos? You're nuts. Shabbos is an ancient thing in the wilderness. We're civilized people. We're not barbarians. Of course I don't keep Shabbos. So the Panovich Rav says, this, Rabbi Yosy, is the difference. The Torah says, if you're Averis make you red like a beet, then you'll do tshuva, then you have charata, then kashala galbinu. Sure, Orthodox do Averis. Of course we do Averis. But look at our reaction when we're confronted with them. We turn red like a beet. The rabbi can't even open his mouth. He's so shocked by having been uncovered and embarrassed about his Averis. That Hashem will take back. That Hashem will be moichel. You're proud of your Averis. If you're proud of your Averis, there is no hope for you. And I once heard Rav David Cohen speak. Rav David Cohen told us that he speaks once a week. He gives a shiur for Rabbanim Eastern Long Island. Many of them Rabbanim of Kehillas, that many of their members aren't even Shomer Shabbos. So he said, I was speaking for them the week that congregation Ahavas Yisrael opened up in Manhattan. Ahavas Yisrael is the gay synagogue of Manhattan. And he was speaking, so they asked him, Rabbi, what do you say about it? What's your opinion about this new synagogue? So he told us, I shocked him a little bit. I told him, I don't understand what the problem is. They're chayav skila for their Averis, but your congregations have Mechalei Shabbos that are also chayav skila. So why are you making such a big deal? They're no different than you are. You have mispalim who are chayav skila, and they have mispalim who are chayav skila. So they got a little shocked that I would react that way, that I would make such a comment. And then they said, but I'll tell you the difference. The difference is the name of your shul is not Congregation Mechalei Shabbos. That's not your banner. That's something that we have, and you didn't have to do tshuva, and we have problems. We're not going to say everything's perfect. But if that's your banner that you're flying, that's what you're proud of, that's really condemnable. And now for sure I'm off of YouTube. Zok tehele gemara vayter. Zok tehele gemara vayter. What's that? Okay. Zok the gemara vayter. Lo yahayu magia lemachzor. By the time the goat was halfway down the mountain, it was already chopped into pieces. Iboilu. Are you allowed to use those evarim? Are they mutar or no afterwards? Rabbi Shmuel. There's a machlokes between Rabbi Shmuel. Chadam and mutarin, the chadam are asur. One says mutar, one says asur. Mandam and mutarin, the mandam are all that they're mutar bano. It's because he has a pasuk. Yechsiv b'midbar. It says in the pasuk b'midbar. It says v'nasa sa'ir asher. All of us. And Rashi says the Bamidbar teaches you, it's hefker like a midbar, meaning it's mutter to be used. Manda marsurin, the chesiv gzera. Gzera is a lashon chaymer v'isir, Rashi says. Manda marsurin, if you hold that it's also bano, high midbar, my avidlay, what do you learn from the word midbar, which seems to indicate that it's free? So come on, Hamidbara, Bamidbar, Hamidbara, Bamidbar. It mentions the word midbar 3 times to teach you l'rabbis noiv givoin, that in noiv and givoin there was the mitzvah of the Lazazel. In Mishkan Shiloi there was the mitzvah of the Lazazel. Who Beis Elamim, and even when the Beis Hamikdash was built, we had the same halacha. But tell us that this halacha was done in all of these 3 places. V'idich, and what about the other mandamar? Hi gzer my abud lay. What is you can do with the word gzer, which indicates that it's aser bana? Gzera, ein gzera ela chatucha, which means Rashi says chatucha tzoich chatach b'skifa. It can't be a smooth cliff. It has to be a cliff with a lot of jagged edges. It can't be straight down. Rather, it has to have little mini peaks along the way so that it'll chop apart anything that gets thrown down. Davar acher, en gzeira el davar hamizgazer b'yoyri. Rashi says, what is mizgazer b'yoyri? It's referring to the seir. It's not referring to the mountain. Ha-seir mizgazer ba'evarim evarim. The seir has to be ripped into shreds on the way down. Davar acher, gzeira. Why does it say gzeira? Shema timer ma'isa tayuhu. You might say, what type of kapara? Ma kapara yesh b'shuluch say. What type of barbaric action is this? And what type of kapara do you expect to get out of it? Ma yesh b'yad tzoik zelahayil. How exactly is this mountaintop going to help be mechaper our averes? Talmud Leimer ani Hashem gezartiv. I made this gzeira. That's why it says gzeira. I made this gzeira. Ve'ein lach rishus lahar bahen. And you have no rishus to second guess the gzeres of the Rabban Shalom. We don't understand it. Amar Rava, mistaver command the Amar mutarin. It's more mistaver to say that the Evarim that remain from this animal on the mountain, it's more mistaver to say that they're mutar bana. Why? Because how is anybody passing by that mountain sometime in the future, if they find a limb or something, how are they supposed to know that this is Kodesh? The Torah would never allow us to leave body parts around that someone might find and have a no from, and it would end up that they had a no from Yisur and no. So it must be that it's mutar bana. Once the mitzvah is discharged, it's mutar bana.
What's the hana, that you would feed it to an animal or something? Because it's obviously nevela.
Yeah. I'm not sure exactly where you benefit. I don't know, maybe you can make some ornament out of its hoof, or you'd feed it to an animal. Yeah. Normally, if I would walk down a mountain and I would see some broken body part, I wouldn't reach for it. But I guess
a deer once struck my car on the thruway, and it was the middle of the night. I called the state troopers. They came I needed a thing for my insurance. So he asked me, "Where's the deer?" I don't know. It's back there. He said, "Do you want it?" I said, "No, thank you. I'll take a pass."
Okay. Thunder Rabbanan. You do drive up north, you drive sometimes and you see people driving their cars with an animal tied to its bumper. Thunder Rabbanan. Azazel. What does the word Azazel mean? Az v'kosha. It should be tough and hard. So Rashi says, Az is strong and El is strong. El Lashon kosha. El has a meaning of toughness. Yochel b'yishuv. You might think that this is not out in the wilderness. It's in the city. It has to be in a remote area. How do you know it has to be Har Zakuf, a cliff? Another brayse, Azazel Kosher Bahar. It's got to be a tough mountain. Got to be what's it called? A black diamond. It's called a tough mountain. Okay. This pasuk is referring to in Golus. I think Nebuchadnezzar took not just the king, but he took all of the tough, strong people of Yisrael as hostages. So you see, it refers to strong people as Elei. So you see, the lashon El is a lashon of strength. Tanu Dvei B'Shmuel Azazel shemechaper al Maisa Uza v'Azel. David left here. We actually need David's help over here, because Rashi says that Uza v'Azel. David once did a whole shiur on it. It says Malachi Chavola. They had to do with the giants, and they were actually malachim, or some type of malach came and made it with humans, and they created a hybrid type of person. Now, David has a whole shiur on it. It was actually a hybrid people that were the offspring of Malach and Chavola that were mezavik with women from the world. Meaning is nus. Aleim nemar v'yur b'nei lakimis b'nois adam. I'm sorry?
Aren't those the Nephilim?
Yeah, I think so. They were in the Nephilim, and I think David Zolta has a whole analysis on them. But they came because there were Malach and Chavola that had relations with humans. So it's not referring specifically to that, but it's referring to nus. So the Sir Lazazel primarily is mechaper on the Aver of nus. Tanu Rabbanim. Now I know why those people were attacking and telling the guy, "Go already, throw it down the mountain." Now I understand why they were so concerned. Tanu Rabbanim. Es mishpatai tasu. It says in the pasuk, "Es mishpatai tasu." Let's see the pasuk inside. It says, "Mishpatai tasu, v'eschukoisai tishmeru, l'lechas b'hem, ani Hashem alakech." So zok the Gemara. Shel malay nichtavu. What are mishpatim? Mishpatai tasu. Mishpatim are things that we would understand with logic, even if they were not commanded to us by the Torah. Dinu sheyichtavu. It's logical that they should be commanded. Be'elohein. What are the averis that logic tells us we should stay away from? Avoidus kechavim, right? How dare we rebel on the creator of the world? The gil arayos, that's immorality. The shvichas damim and killing. The gezel, ubrichas Hashem, cursing the Rebbeinu Shalom. So these are all things that logic dictates should be prohibited. But then the pasuk says, "As chukoisai tishmeru," that are things devarim shasatan meishamaleh. These are things that the Satan would be able to create an argument that it's not necessary. We don't understand why it's also for us to eat chazir. All of these things are difficult for us to understand why the Hashem made these chazers. Oh, I'm happy you asked.
Why didn't it say paraduma? Why didn't it say paraduma? Is that the classic?
Rabbi Elephant asked that question, and he had a beautiful, beautiful teretz that I forgot. So, I'm going to remind myself what it is,
and I'll share it example.
There was a fundamental difference between paraduma and all of these things. That was obvious, but I don't remember what they were. But he did speak out. He specifically spoke. Paraduma is the classic case of a chukah. So, and it's the parashas chukas. That's right. Okay, so I'll get the answer, but Ravel didn't speak out that question. The Shema Taimar, maybe you'll argue that these are not legit and it's nonsense. Ani Hashem Chakaktiv, I establishes the Ein Lach Rishus Lahar Herbahen. You have no Rishus to comment on it and to second guess it. Does anybody have an English article? Well, how does it touch the word Chakaktiv? I think it means I said it. I decreed. I decreed it, and you have no rishus to second guess. Zohar to Gemara, a Masai mitame begodim. I wouldn't be surprised if the article asks why it doesn't mention paraduma. It doesn't. Okay. So I'll listen to Rabbi Elephant again. Taner Rabban, Hameshalayach mitame begodim, ve'ena shaylayach es hameshalayach mitame begodim. So the Mishalayach, the person, the Ish Iti, his begotten become Tomei. But the Kohen in the Azara who hands it off to the Mishalayach, he doesn't become Tomei. You might think the moment the Ish Iti leaves the Azara, he becomes Tomei. Mishalayach indicates that he's far away. Rashi Mishalayach means he's already well on his way. If it means you're already sent away, maybe maybe you don't become Tomei until you get to the mountain. It's somewhere in the middle. The Tomei is triggered when the person leaves the walls of Yerushalayim. It says Azazel the Chibes, because the Lashon HaPasuk is, it says right after it says the word Azazel, it says V'chives, and we learn from there, until he gets to the mountain, until he gets to the Azazel, that's when he has the Chi of Kibbutz. So that means he has to actually push it off the mountain. Once he pushes its head backwards, then that's when the tumah is triggered. So in fact, there's a three-way machlokes. Is the tumah triggered as soon as he leaves Yerushalayim? Is the tumah triggered as soon as he arrives to the mountaintop? Or is the tumah only triggered once he pushes the animal off the mountain? So now he's getting back to his avodah. So the Kohen Gadol gave the Sira Mishtalayach to the person. He left. He's headed towards the tzayik. The Kohen Gadol gets back to his avodah. So he already made this rikas dam of the par and sire. Now it's time to process the meat of the animal. So he came back to the par and sire and the shrofin. So he was back in the butchering area. Karan, he sliced open their bellies. And he took out the chilavim that were going to be makter on the mizbeach. Nostum b'magis, he put it into some type of tray or some type of pot. How does the Arshel touch the word magis? A pot or a tray or a container? A bowl. Put it in a bowl. The ktiron al gabe hamizbeach. And then he's makter the emurim on the mizbeach. Rashi has a whole shtickle about what the ktir means, but Rashi says that he wasn't makter it, now he just brought it there. Because we know when he did the Haktorah, he didn't wear the Big Day Lavan. And now he's wearing Big Day Lavan. So Rashi says, Allah Kashli, the Ktirin Salkadaitach, did he actually make Haktorah? Does the Kohen Gadol make the Haktorah now? Big Day Lavan. He's still wearing Big Day Lavan. And before he can change out of them, he has to read the parsha of Yom Kippurim. He has to lay it for everybody. And then he goes into the Big Day Zov. And then and then he has to table again to put on his Big Day Lavan again to take out the Kafa Machta. And then and then he tables again to go back into the Big Day Zov for the Musafim ve'emur chatz halalu. So in fact, it just means that he brought it towards the Mizbeach, but he didn't actually place him on the fire because that's not ready to happen yet. Kolam b'maklois, they took the body of both the par and the seir, and they had two poles held by four kohanim. So one kohen on each end of a pole. So there's two parallel poles, and on top of those two parallel poles are these two animals, the two carcasses of the seir and of the par that are sort of twisted together. And in that fashion, they were carried out to the place outside the Beis HaMikdash where they were burnt. We know the people who burned the emurim are also tamei. They become tamei when they leave the azara. Only once the fire catches onto the meat. I guess we could stop there. Shkoyach.
Yosy, Mazel.
Mazel. Is Shmuel with you too?
Yeah, Shmuel's right here. Mazel Shmuel.
Mazel Shmuel.
Two of the same day in this shiur. Beautiful. Two Mazel Tovs.
And this is the bar mitzvah week.
And the bar mitzvah week. Oh, okay.